And so with that, I am very happy to talk about Beatrice. Beatrice went to Caltech and Berkeley. She spent a long time at Intel and has done just about everything. She worked starting as a device physicist, eventually became design manager on the 486, and then made a conscious decision to switch over to the software side to found and lead the compiler team for the x86 and eventually became the director for the whole microcomputer software laboratory. And then she came to Tensilica and started and remained the VP of engineering for Tensilica, building the entire team, building the entire product, and transitioned along with the rest of us into Cadence and led the R&D for the processor engineering for a considerable period of time, for 5 years after the M&A. So let me welcome Beatrice, and let me bring up your slides.
Thank you, Chris.
Let's see, where did those slides go?
Oh, maybe I can see if I share it now.
No, I'll get them up here in a moment.
Okay, thank you.
It's just finding the right window. Here it is.
Right. So following Chris' presentation of product development, Chris knows a lot about that. And I would just like to offer a few additional points before we proceed to Q&A. So I have just a 2-3 slides to share and to talk about some experience we have as a startup early day. Okay. So
is that
Chris,
visible?
That's doable.
Let me see if I can make it a little bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. So Chris talked about the POR. POR is actually not that is a plan, but it's a living document. It's a dynamic document, and as Chris mentioned, it recorded the agreed upon product scope and feature list. However, as you all know, you work in I don't know most of you, but I'm sure that you work in organization, and you know the plans are subject to change for various reasons. And in your capacity as a leader, it's essential to manage this change effectively and minimize surprise for your team, your peers, and if necessary, as a startup, the board of directors, because they fund you. So it's not any different, but probably more intense as a startup that you should have that communication. And the POR can also serve as a communication tool to convey the high-level status of development. It is not a substitute to detailed trackings or interactions among collaborators, but rather informing other functional teams who share release schedule, or for business teams who are establishing customer expectation. And as Chris, you remember in Tensilica, we use just a simple green, yellow, and red. Just decide whether it's okay, it maybe it's tight, or it's in danger. So increasing that awareness facilitates early dialogue and maybe help to clarify dependency across groups, especially for us. We have the hardware team, software team, UI team. We have all these different disciplines coming together to form the product. And when there's a need to make a change, this is no different for big company. As a leader, it's your responsibility to manage and decide what to change. But as a startup, there's often not sufficient time or data, but you still have to make it, because indecision could be really detrimental to the company, because it would create inefficiencies that result from uncertainty and divergent assumptions among team members. And that means schedule slip and many expectations. So it's time that you have to make your best judgment with whatever data we have, or you have. Next slide, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Next page. So concerning the engineering organization, actually as a startup, forming the initial core team and start structuring the functional groups is a significant but a fun process because you have all the freedom. You are starting from scratch and you're building something. But after the initial build up, one faces the same issues as an established company, but with more limited financial resources. Now, the engineering resource landscape is undergoing drastic changes, like maybe now not AI coding, but at least with AI assistance. So the number of resources needed different can be revisited. But I think the concepts of feature prioritization and cost should still apply. Chris talked about ideally we can build a prototype and building just enough to like test out the customer. But as a start, we always have the constraint of cash burn. They need to be considered. The reality is, under financial constraints, one has to be very selective. What are the must-have functions? What are the functions that you develop that's going to eventually bring you revenue? And you would probably consider offshoring to save costs. But as you mentioned, in the early day, you should do enough homework to understand if it's worth it. I mean, in my opinion, the early day innovation among teams, and Chris mentioned about it too, is important to them for them to have the intense communications among different groups. Now, attrition also inevitably occurs due to multiple factors. I mean, maybe it's not the fault of the company. When that happens, besides managing the loss, you should also pay attention to team morale, because as startup engineers are usually quite sensitive about people leaving and are they making the wrong choices. And managing the team morale would prevent further loss. And on top of that, one should mentally prepare for challenging times. Even your execution is flawless. Business conditions can be affected by external factors. In Tensilica, we definitely have some very challenging times. The dot-com bust in, I suppose, 2001, 2002, and also the 2008 financial crisis has resulted in a major business slowdown. So that means our incoming cash, our revenue dropped substantially. And our reasonable choice not to run off cash and keep the company alive is to cut spending and hence a layoff. And it's not pleasant to lay off the good people you hire. But when you have to do it.
I remember at Tensilica, we had to downsize from about 140 people to about 100 people, as I recall.
Yes.
And
yes.
that was
and
one of the most painful things that I can imagine doing. People took it reasonably well because we were not alone in having to downsize like that. But still, these are your close colleagues, people that you
yes.
have spent blood and sweat with over multiple years. So it's really terrible for them and hard for everybody else.
Yes. And on top of that, like you mentioned that, and actually I remember most of the cutting come from engineering. We pretty sure cut the team size into half, and it was very painful. And then you have to consider, how do I keep the product and company going alive, but letting go this set of people which actually you value. And lately, I heard about some big tech companies doing mass layoff through email notifications. Try your best not to do that. I think that having the respect to people you let go is part of your duty for hiring the team. It may not bring you something bad, but I think it's something that somebody should respect. And also, I'm sure you all know what motivates your team. It's exciting to join a startup and create something new, but there's always a risk of joining a startup. Statistically, most startups did not exit successfully. So the reality is the major incentive for the employees to take the risk is stock options. So unless you are lucky, like that your company exit in a few years, 2 years, when the 4th year vesting is up, is usually a consideration for the employee to job change. And because the refresh grants are usually not as rich unless your company is in trouble. And if your company is in trouble, doesn't matter. I mean, it's like it's going to be the stock is not going to be valued as much. And if your startup lasts that long, be prepared to deal with the 10-year stock option expiration, which is you have to
Yeah.
deal with that too. But like,
Tensilica was relatively rare in needing to worry about the 10-year expiration of options. It forces people to commit money to exercise options
yes.
before they see a cash reward come out. So most startups either fail or something happens to them within 10 years. So for most companies, it's not an issue. But Tensilica was uh, a very slow boil.
Well, I think it also, unfortunately, the 10 years, remember 2008 was also coincide with the financial crisis. So the
Yes.
initial batch of that like expiration turned out to be not the time that we can exit anyway. So
Yeah.
next slide.
Yeah.
And I just have a few more remarks about release and maintenance that like Chris has already talked about. Now, balancing the time period that between major release actually involve competing consideration. You all know that if any innovative features or substantial features takes time to develop, whereas as a startup, the time to market and actually the business team really want you to have new product frequently to catch the attention of the customer. So those are two conflicting things. And on top of that, even if you any frequent release, any release, as you all know, there's overhead, the code freeze, the testing, and means that you have more time to like not be able to make progress and just like cleaning up your code base. That means less time dedicated to development. So all this conflicting is something you have to watch out for. And so for a startup, making choices can be even more difficult because we have to watch out for the cash burn. And as a leader, it's your duty to make the balancing judgment and live with it. In a bigger company, sometimes they have the financial resource to absorb different kind of like misjudgment, but in a startup, not that much there. The other thing that Chris talked about, the hardware testing. So in Tensilica, actually our testing is the hardware testing continue post-release. The idea is like hardware bugs are difficult. We want to find our own bugs before customer. And so we have set up some automated testing continue post-release, and we run those cycles continuously every night. And many times, yes, because like the thing is, no matter how much you put out as the criteria, how much testing you do, there's always some chance for some bugs to escape, especially for hardware. There's so much parallel, so much interactions that you cannot predict. So those testing enable us to find most bugs before customer. I do not recall any customer actually commit errata to silicon. We have been able that, well, first of all, there's not that much of them. Any of them we have been able to handle it and before our customer. So that works out. And the important thing also when it's a hardware errata, you have to be honest and do not hide because it's your reputation for your customer. And if you have software on top of hardware, there's always some software workaround that maybe to avoid that particular hardware bug. And for us, we also publish the errata often to make the process mundane, so the customer do not panic about it whenever we tell them this, like there is a errata.
Yeah, we want to have a short, boring list of errata.
Yep, and we did.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and thanks to you, Beatrice, I think that Tensilica did a remarkable job relative to other processor makers on
Yes.
how well tested the product was, and generally how good the communication was in the few cases. I think that
Well,
you know, because
that
of this post,
we actually have to thank Intel because I lived through the floating point bug in 1993
right,
as
right,
well.
right.
That was a big
You
deal.
were
Okay.
reflecting the scars that you had developed through that pain. What I
Okay.
find even to go with that is that the volume of Tensilica processors out in the world is also much larger than the volume of Intel x86 processors out in the world. by virtue of the fact that we go into these super high volume applications. And well, they're not as visible, of course, not by orders of magnitude as the main processor in a computer. It is, in fact, a ton of computation that we successfully shipped.
Yeah, and also
So,
when we get into oftentimes there are multiple of our cores, so it's different
yeah,
instances.
right, right. So it
Okay.
ends up being tens of billions of